We just received the autopsy report from the medical examiner in Celeste Rivas' death, for which David is now charged with her murder. And there are some interesting things, and we talked about this before, that we knew that the coroner had ruled this, the medical examiner ruled this a homicide, but we didn't know the cause of death. And the DA said they were stabbed, there was some kind of sharp
instrument was used.
Now we know, and what they're saying is there were two wounds in particular, and that they believe, and they use the word may, and the word may is going to be really important, which we'll talk about, that they may be penetrating wounds, which would not be wounds to dismember a body.
Right, yeah, because of where they are, they believe, is I think the main, and also
and the way they describe it is they describe two penetrating wounds, one on the abdomen and one on the chest, and they describe them as, they tell you the depth and the length of these, and they say they have smooth edges. Indication seems to me that some sort of knife was plunged into her, and it left smooth edges.
The key is the length of the wounds. One is 3/4 of an inch, one is 9/16. So this size wound as the penetrative wound. These are
which
not,
is an indication of the length of the blade.
And also a blade that could not dismember a body, right? This would not be the same instrument used to dismember the body.
Now, the body was dismembered. They describe all that in detail, but those types of cuts to take the body apart would be different than knife cuts.
Does the report say anything about the dismemberment or what they believe was used?
They don't say what was used.
No, it does describe it in a lot of detail.
But it's gruesome.
Yeah.
So there's a word that's used, may, that it may have been caused by this. The defense is going to jump on that.
Oh, they'll definitely.
Because they're not saying it's conclusive, and it aligns with what we've been hearing, which is they were having a really hard time determining how she died.
Well, look at the passage of time.
As recently as February.
The passage of time to determine this is a long, it's many, many months.
There's also, and it's conflicting, and we still can't quite figure it out, but there are references to finding presumptive positive indications that she had both meth and MDMA in her system.
Although additional screenings showed that to be not detected, but the initial screen said presumptively.
It seems like there were two tests taken, two tox screens. The initial one detected MDMA and methamphetamine. Subsequently, they did a confirmation test, and it was unclear whether there was MDMA, but methamphetamine, but no sign of MDMA at that second confirmation test.
I mean, ultimately, is that going to matter when you get to trial, like whether or not she was
probably
on
not.
any drugs?
Well, they may argue. They may argue it was an overdose. I don't know what they're going to argue, but they'll latch on to what they can.
That's true.
Yeah. But look, I covered the O.J. Simpson case. The coroner was on the stand for 8 days in that case. So this is going to be the centerpiece of the case because, you know, what the DA is saying is, we have evidence she threatened David that she would expose their relationship, probably in a text. That's the way they make it seem. And that she goes to David's house on April 23rd, 2025, never to be seen again.
Right.
So now the question, what happened? So the prosecutor's going to say, he stabbed her to death. And here are these two wounds. And then you're going to have the defense coming out and saying, look, number one, you didn't say conclusively, you're saying may. And this is a reasonable doubt case. Number two, if it was so clear to you, why 4 months in were you still saying undetermined? So this is going to be a huge part of this case.
And also, I would think, maybe they'll say this, that it would get harder to find those wounds the more time passes. Like, they found her body in September. And I'm sure it's refrigerated, but the state of decomposition, I would think it gets harder by March. Now, suddenly, what changed?
I think they're going to freeze it once they find the body. They can freeze it in the state.
But why I don't think that was what they found months later. Those penetrative wounds must have been known to the coroner right from this.
But then why did they say we may never be able to determine whether
the body was in a very bad state? The insects and so forth are described in there, liquefaction of organs and things of that nature. But the body that you can see in their diagram shows these two penetrating wounds, and those are inconsistent with dismemberment.
Well, there'll be pictures.
There
will be photographs.
There's going to be photographs of everything.
There will be photographs of all of this in the trial. But again, the defense is going to get every correspondence, every inter-office correspondence in the ME's office, and correspondence that goes to either LAPD or DA about what have you found with the cause of death, or the manner of death. And if these correspondents say, we can't figure it out, we can't figure it out, then the question is, how'd you figure it out? And why would it take you so long to see a penetrating wound?
And they want to see if there's a pressure being applied by other officials to come to a conclusion or things of that nature. That's going to be tough on prosecutors if they're applying pressure.
And we know right from the beginning, Nathan Hochman, the DA, was putting a lot of pressure to find an answer what happened to this girl.
Look, for good reason.
And for good reasons, but that might go to the pressure.
But we don't know. Again, we don't know, and we're not saying anything about what the truth here is. It's just this is going to be the core of this trial. This will be the core of the trial. Well, you know, what we just got, and it's a very thick document and very detailed, and clearly the way it's written, I mean, you can tell this coroner knows that this will be subjected to great scrutiny.
Absolutely.
And I think that's again, I keep going back to that word may, because that's a critical,
the lack of a definitive
critical word.
Lily, NYC. I think that this actually sort of clears things up a bit. It was very confusing, you know, the details around the state of her body. And so actually pointing out wounds sort of gives us something to go on. So definitely the defense will have a lot to say, but I think this is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, to be continued. There's a hearing tomorrow on exactly when this preliminary hearing is going to go down.